A fist pounded on a wooden door in the dead of night. Inside the small homestead, an old man grabbed his rifle. An old woman pulled her shawl tight and froze by the fire. The pounding came again, weaker this time, and then a woman's voice, cracked and desperate, begging to be let in. The old man opened the door a crack. A young woman stood there in the freezing dark, soaked through, half-starved, and heavily, unmistakably pregnant. One hand braced against the door frame to keep from falling. But she was not looking at the old man. She was looking past him into the house, at the small bed by the fire where a child lay burning with fever. "Your boy is dying," she whispered. "I can hear it in his breathing. Let me help him, please." Her name was Della. And what she did over the next 3 nights, the old couple would never forget. Stay with me on this one. The old man's name was Samuel Hartley. His wife was Edith. They were both past 60, and they lived alone on a small homestead at the edge of the frontier, a full day's ride from the nearest town. They had worked that hard land their whole lives. They had buried more than they cared to count out on that prairie, crops that failed, animals that died, and worst of all, for children over the years, lost to fever and winter and 1,000 things that killed children on the frontier. 4 children. And only one had ever lived past the age of 10. His name was Thomas. He was 8 years old. And he was the light of their entire world, the late, unexpected blessing of 2 people who had long ago given up hope of raising a child to grow up. Samuel and Edith had poured every ounce of love they had left into that boy. And now Thomas was dying. It had started 5 days ago. A fever. At first they thought it was nothing, the kind of thing children shake off. But it had climbed and would not break. Samuel had ridden the whole day to fetch the only doctor in the region. The doctor had come, looked at the boy, shaken his head, and said the words no parent can bear to hear. "There is nothing more I can do. Keep him comfortable. Pray." Then the doctor had ridden away, and left Samuel and Edith alone to watch their last living child slip away from them, hour by hour. That was the night the knock came. Now here is the thing you have to understand. When that pregnant stranger appeared at their door in the dark, claiming she could heal a child the doctor had given up on, every sensible bone in Samuel Hartley's body told him to send her away. He had lived a long time. He knew the frontier was full of frauds and drifters and people who would say anything to get a warm bed and a meal. A pregnant woman wandering alone in the freezing dark, miles from anywhere, appearing at the exact moment his son lay dying, promising a miracle? It had the smell of a trick. Or worse. "Who are you?" Samuel said, not lowering the rifle. "Where did you come from?" "There is no town for a day's ride in any direction." "I have been walking," the woman said. "A long time. Please. Your boy does not have until morning. I can hear it. That rattle in his chest. I have heard it before." Edith came up behind her husband. She looked at the young woman shivering in the doorway, soaked, exhausted, swollen with child, clearly at the very end of her strength. And then she looked back at the bed by the fire, where her son's breathing had gone shallow and fast and wet. "Samuel," Edith said quietly. "Let her in." "Edith." The doctor already gave up on him. Her voice broke. "What do we have left to lose?" "What?" Samuel Hartley stood there a long moment, torn between a lifetime of hard-won caution and the sight of his only child dying. Then, slowly, he lowered the rifle and stepped aside. The young woman came in out of the cold. She did not go to the fire to warm herself, though she was clearly freezing. She did not ask for food, though she was clearly starving. She went straight to the boy. She knelt beside Thomas's bed, slow and careful with the weight of her belly, and she put one hand on the child's forehead and one hand on his chest. She closed her eyes. She listened to his breathing for a long moment. And when she opened her eyes, there was something in them that made both old people go still. Certainty. This was not a fraud guessing. This was someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. "Pneumonia," she said. "On top of the fever. His lungs are filling. That is what is killing him, not the fever itself." She looked up at them. "I need boiling water. I need every blanket you have. And I need you to bring me my bag from the porch and not look too closely at what is inside it. Can you do those things?" Samuel and Edith looked at each other. "What is your name?" Edith asked. "Della," the woman said. "My name is Della. Now please. We do not have much time." And so it began. The old couple, who had been preparing to watch their son die, instead found themselves following the instructions of a pregnant stranger who had walked out of the freezing dark. They did not know who she was. They did not know where she came from or where she was going or what she was running from. They only knew that she seemed to know exactly what she was doing. And they were about to find out that Della knew a great deal more than any doctor on the frontier. The question was, where had a half-starved pregnant woman learned to heal a dying child? And what was she running from out there in the dark? What Della did over the next few hours, Samuel and Edith watched in something close to disbelief. She had them prop the boy up, not lay him flat so his lungs could drain. She boiled water and steeped herbs from her bag, things Edith did not recognize, dried leaves and roots and barks, and she had the boy breathe the steam to loosen his chest. She made a poultice warm and strong-smelling, and laid it across his small ribs. She brewed a bitter tea and got it into him a spoonful at a time, patient as anything, hour after hour through the night. And she talked to him the whole time. Soft and steady. Even though the boy was barely conscious, she talked to him, told him he was strong, told him to keep fighting, told him she was not going to let him go. Samuel watched this stranger pour herself into saving his son, and something in his suspicion began to crack. "Where did you learn this?" he asked her, somewhere in the small hours of the morning. Della did not look up from the boy. "My grandmother," she said. "She raised me. She knew the old ways. Plants, healing, how the body fights. She learned it from her mother and her from hers all the way back." Pause. People came from miles around when someone was dying and the doctors had given up. The way you gave up. "And where is your grandmother now?" Della's hands went still for just a moment. "Gone," she said. "It is just me now." She would say no more than that. And Samuel, watching her work, decided not to push. By dawn something had changed. The boy's breathing, which had been so shallow and wet, had eased. Just a little. The terrible rattle had quieted. His fever, which had been burning, had come down a degree. He was not well, not nearly. But for the first time in days he was not actively dying. Edith pressed both hands to her mouth and wept. "Do not celebrate yet," Della said softly. "The next 2 nights are the danger. The fever will fight back. But the worst of the lungs is past. If we can get him through the next 2 nights, I think he will live." 2 more nights. Della stayed. Of course she stayed. She could barely stand by that point, exhausted and pregnant and having walked God knew how far before she ever reached their door. Edith made up a bed for her by the fire and finally got some food into her. A whole bowl of stew that Della ate like she had not eaten in days because she had not. And over those 2 days, as the boy slowly fought his way back toward life under Della's care, the old couple came to know the young woman who had saved him. A little. They learned she was kind. Endlessly patient with the sick child. They learned she was strong, far stronger than her thin frame suggested. They learned she was due to give birth herself within weeks, and that the thought of it clearly frightened her, alone as she was. But they also saw the other things. The way Della startled at every sound from outside. The way she watched the road, always the road, through the window. The way she kept her bag close and once, when Samuel moved it to make room, the way she lunged for it like it contained her very life. These were not the habits of a woman simply passing through. These were the habits of a woman being hunted. Samuel said nothing about it, but he saw. He had hunted enough game in his life to know what a hunted thing looked like. And Della, for all her gifts, looked exactly like a creature that knew something was coming for it. On the 3rd morning the fever broke for good. Thomas opened his eyes, really opened them, clear and present for the first time in nearly a week, and he looked up at his mother and said, "Mama, I am hungry." Edith made a sound that was half sob and half laughter and gathered her son into her arms. The boy was going to live. Della, sitting by the fire, watched the family weep with joy, and she allowed herself a small, tired smile. She had done it. She had walked out of the dark with nothing, and she had given these strangers back their child. For one moment, sitting in the warmth of that little house, with a saved child laughing across the room, Della let herself feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Safe. She let herself believe, just for a breath, that maybe the worst was finally behind her. That maybe she had found in this remote little homestead a place to rest. A place to have her baby. A place where the thing that hunted her would never think to look. She closed her eyes by the warm fire and let herself rest. And that is exactly when they heard it. Hoofbeats. Several horses. Coming up the road, fast in the gray morning light. Della's eyes flew open. And the blood drained from her face. "No," she whispered. "No, no, not here. Not now." She was already on her feet, already reaching for her bag, already looking for somewhere to run. "They found me," she breathed. Della moved to the window and looked out, and what she saw made her press a hand to her mouth. 4 men on horseback, riding hard up the road toward the homestead. And at the front of them, on a tall black horse, rode a man in a long dark coat that Della clearly recognized, because the moment she saw him, she backed away from that window like she had seen the devil himself. "Who are they?" Samuel demanded, rifle already in his hands. "You have to hide me," Della said, and now the calm healer was gone and there was raw terror in her voice. "Please." The man in the coat. "His name is Brother Ezekiel. I came from a settlement 2 weeks' walk from here. A closed place. He runs it. He calls himself a man of God." Her hands were shaking. "I was promised to him. Against my will. When he found out I was carrying another man's child, he did not cast me out. He decided the child was a sin that had to be answered for. I ran the night before he was going to." She could not finish. "I have been walking ever since. I thought I had lost them. I thought." And here the whole story changed. This was no longer about a stranger healing a sick child. This was about a young woman weeks from giving birth, being hunted across the frontier by a fanatic who believed her and her unborn baby were a sin to be erased. The kindness of the last 3 days, the herbs and the steam and the saved boy, all of it was about to collide with 4 armed men riding up to the door. And listen to me. If you are with Della and this old couple the way I am right now, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button. Because what Samuel Hartley did next, after this stranger saved his only son, is the entire reason I had to tell you this story. Now stay with me. Because those 4 men were almost at the door. Edith was already moving. "The root cellar," she said. "Under the floor, behind the table. Go. Now." Della looked at these 2 old people, these strangers who owed her nothing, about to put themselves between her and 4 armed men. "You do not understand what he is," Della said. "If he finds me here, he will hurt you too. You should just give me up. You should." "Child." Samuel Hartley looked at her, and his weathered old face was as hard as the prairie itself. 3 nights ago you walked out of the dark and you gave us back our son when the doctor told us to dig his grave. There is no power on this earth that will make me hand you over to a man who wants to hurt you and that baby. Now get in the cellar. Let me handle this." Della, with tears in her eyes, climbed down into the dark root cellar. Edith slid the table back over the door. And Samuel Hartley stepped out onto his porch, rifle in hand, to face 4 men alone. The riders pulled up in the yard. Brother Ezekiel sat tall on his black horse, a thin man with a gray beard and pale, cold eyes, the eyes of a man absolutely certain that God was on his side. "Good morning, brother," Ezekiel said, his voice smooth and pleasant. "We are searching for a young woman. With child. She is one of my flock, gravely ill in her mind, prone to wild stories and very dangerous to herself. She fled our community some weeks ago. We have tracked her this way. Have you seen her?" "No," Samuel said. "That is a shame. She is heavy with child and not in her right mind. For her own safety she must be returned." Ezekiel's pale eyes moved past Samuel to the house. "You live alone out here?" "Me and my wife. And my boy." "Then you will not mind if my men take a look around. Just to be certain. For the poor woman's safety." And it was not a question. The 4 men began to dismount. Samuel Hartley raised his rifle. "The first man who sets foot off his horse," Samuel said very calmly, "does not get back on it." Everything went still. Brother Ezekiel's pleasant smile did not change. But his cold eyes did. "You would raise a weapon," he said softly, "against a man of God. Over a stranger. Think very carefully, brother, about what you are protecting. And about how very alone you are out here." "I have thought about it," Samuel said. "Get off my land." And Brother Ezekiel, looking at the old man's steady rifle and steadier eyes, slowly smiled a smile with no warmth in it at all. "As you say," he murmured, "we will go. For now." The 4 men turned their horses. But as they rode out, Brother Ezekiel looked back over his shoulder, straight at the house, straight it seemed at the very floorboards Della hid beneath. "We will be back tonight," he called, "with more men. And we will look in every room." And they rode away to wait for the dark. Samuel came back inside and slid the table away and helped Della up out of the cellar. "They are gone," he said. "But not for long. He said he would come back tonight with more men." He looked at his wife, then at the terrified young woman. "We have until dark to decide what to do." "You have to let me go," Della said immediately. "I will leave now, on foot, go a different direction, lead them away from you." "You are 8 months pregnant and you can barely stand," Edith said. "You would not last a mile." "No. Then they will find me here and they will hurt you and—" "Della." Samuel sat down heavily at the table. "Sit. Both of you. We are going to think this through. Like sensible people. Because running and panicking gets us all killed." And so they sat, the three of them and Samuel Hartley, who had survived 60 hard years on the frontier by being smarter than the land that tried to kill him, began to think. "This Ezekiel," he said. "He calls himself a man of God. He travels with armed men. He hunts a pregnant woman across 100 miles of wilderness to punish her. Tell me, Della, does the law know what goes on in this settlement of his?" "The law?" Della laughed bitterly. "There is no law out where he is. He is the law. That is how he does what he does." "But there is law in town," Samuel said slowly. "A real marshal. A day's ride from here. And I am thinking, a man like Ezekiel who rules by fear and calls it God, a man like that has surely left a trail. Other women. Other families. Other graves." He looked at Della. "You said he was going to harm you and the baby. Were there others before you? Others who did not get away?" Della went very quiet. "Yes," she whispered. "There were others. I'm the only one who ever ran. The only one who got away to tell it." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then you are not just a woman who escaped," he said. "You are a witness. The only living witness to what that man has done. And that changes everything. That is not something he wants returned to his settlement to be silenced. That is something the marshal in town needs to hear. Here is what Samuel Hartley did. He did not try to win a gunfight against Ezekiel and a dozen men in the dark. He was one old man. That was a fight he would lose. Instead, he did the smart thing. The thing Ezekiel, in all his arrogance, never expected from a lone old homesteader. He sent for the law. Samuel had a neighbor, the closest one, a half-day's ride south, a young man named Cole with a fast horse who owed Samuel more than one favor. While there was still daylight, Samuel rode hard to Cole's place, and he sent that young man galloping toward town to fetch the marshal and tell him there was a man hunting a witness to murder, and to ride through the night and come fast. Then Samuel rode home to defend his house until help could come. Night fell, and brother Ezekiel came back just as he promised. Not with 4 men this time. With 9. They rode into the yard with torches, and Ezekiel called out into the dark, his smooth voice carrying, "Brother, we both know she is in there. I have no wish to harm you or your family. Send the woman out and we ride away and you never see us again. Keep protecting her, and what happens next is on your soul, not mine." Inside the house, Samuel and Edith and Della sat in the dark, the boy hidden in the cellar, the rifle loaded. They were badly outnumbered. They all knew it. "Last chance, brother," Ezekiel called. And then, from out in the darkness beyond the torchlight, a new voice rang out. "This is United States Marshal Thomas Reed. You men are surrounded. Drop your weapons and step down from your horses. Now." Ezekiel's head whipped around. Out of the dark came riders, the marshal and a posse of 6 deputized men, rifles leveled, having ridden through the entire night to get there. Young Cole had reached town. The marshal had come. And brother Ezekiel, who ruled his little world by being the only power in it, suddenly found himself for the first time in years, looking down the barrels of a law bigger than he was. "This is a misunderstanding," Ezekiel began. "These men and I are simply—" "I have heard about you," the marshal said. "For 2 years I have heard whispers about that settlement and the people who go in and never come out. What I never had was a witness." His eyes found Della standing now in the doorway. "Looks like I have one now." It was over quickly after that. Faced with the marshal's guns and their leader exposed, Ezekiel's men lost their nerve and surrendered. Ezekiel himself was put in irons, his cold certainty finally cracking as the law he thought could never touch him closed around his wrists. As they led him to his horse, he looked back at Della one last time, his pale eyes full of hate. Della did not look away. For the first time in months she did not have to. "You hunted the wrong woman," she said quietly. "I lived. And now everyone is going to know what you did." Brother Ezekiel was taken to town in chains. Della's testimony, it turned out, was the key that unlocked everything. With a living witness willing to talk, The marshal finally had cause to ride out to that settlement and see for himself what had been happening there. What he found freed a great many frightened people who had been living under Ezekiel's rule, too afraid to run the way Della had. Other families came forward. Other stories came out. The man who had called himself God's hand on the frontier spent the rest of his days behind iron bars, and the settlement he had ruled by fear was broken open and its people set free. And all of it, every bit of it, because one pregnant woman had been brave enough to run, and one old couple had been brave enough to stand at their door and say no. Della did not leave the Hartley homestead. Where would she have gone? She had no family left in the world. And the truth was she had found one, without ever meaning to, in the two old people whose son she had saved. There was never really a conversation about it. There was simply a morning, a week or so after Ezekiel was taken away, when Edith sat down beside Della by the fire and took her hand and said, "Stay. Have your baby here. Let us take care of you the way you took care of us. We have buried 4 children, Della. We have a great deal of love saved up with nowhere to put it. Stay." And Della, who had not had a true home since her grandmother died, who had walked 100 miles through the cold with nothing but a bag of herbs and a baby coming, put her head on the old woman's shoulder and wept, and said yes. Her baby came that spring. A healthy little girl, born in the warmth of that little homestead, with Edith holding one of Della's hands and old Samuel pacing the yard outside like an expectant grandfather. And in a way that is exactly what he had become. Della named the baby Grace. Because that, she said, was what the Hartleys had shown her on the worst night of her life. Grace, given freely to a stranger, when she had nothing to offer in return but a desperate promise to heal a dying boy. The boy, Thomas, grew up strong. He never forgot that he had been dying, and that a stranger had walked out of the dark and saved him. He grew up beside little Grace, the two of them like brother and sister, on a homestead that had once known so much loss and now, in its final chapter, was full of children's voices again. And Della became what her grandmother had been before her. The woman people came to when the doctors gave up. Word spread, slow and quiet, the way it does on the frontier, that out at the old Hartley place there was a healer, a young woman who knew the old ways, who could pull the dying back from the edge. They came from miles around. And Della never turned a soul away. Because she remembered every single time what it was to stand desperate at a stranger's door in the dark, begging to be let in. Years later, Samuel Hartley would sit on his porch in the evenings, older now, slower, but content in a way he had never thought he would be again, and he would watch the 2 children play in the yard, Thomas and Grace, and he would think about that freezing night when a knock came at his door. He had almost turned her away. He thought about that often. How close he had come that night to keeping the door shut. How a lifetime of hard caution had nearly made him send a desperate woman back into the cold. And how, if he had, his son would be in the ground, and the monster who hunted her would still be free, and his old age would be empty and silent instead of full of the sound of children. The smallest choice, to open a door or to keep it closed. It had saved his son's life. It had freed dozens of frightened souls. It had given 2 grieving old people a whole new family in the winter of their lives. All because, when a pregnant stranger stood shivering on his porch and asked to be let in, Edith had put her hand on his arm and said 4 words. "Samuel, let her in." And he had.